All right, good morning. We are the Duncans. We just wanted to introduce ourselves. My name is Ty. That's my wife, Lottie. And then here is Dax.
Adeline. I'm Piper. I'm August.
And this is Tucker.
And he's kind of the reason we're here introducing ourselves, because of just the miracle that has happened in that kid's life and just in our family. So we want to just introduce ourselves, and we're going to kind of share our story. So Adeline's going to start off with, actually, it was just the verse of the day that popped up today on our Bible app, so it was kind of appropriate for the moment. So we'll let her read that real quick. So,
give thanks to the Lord and proclaim His greatness. Let the whole world know what He has done. Psalm 105:1.
And then Lottie's going to share another verse that was something that was it was the first verse that we read over him. I mean, it was literally it was within the first couple of hours of him being in the hospital. So sorry for just sometimes it's a little hard to talk about it still.
The very first day and the first few hours that we thought were his final moments, since the doctors had not given us any good news, I felt the Lord impress on me to read Psalm 139 over Tucker, because I just wanted scripture to be in his ears and what I thought were his last moments. But what I discovered was a little nugget in there I'd never seen before. Verse 12 says, "Even the darkness is not dark to you, for night is bright as the day. For darkness is as light with you." So in the midst of a circumstance that seemed hopeless, God was just whispering to my heart already that He saw things perfectly when we couldn't see and didn't know what was coming.
Yeah, another verse that was put on me was, this was later, I think like 3 or 4 days into it, and just the discouragement at that time was kind of pretty irrelevant, just because we've been turned down by so many hospitals. But this is going to be Luke 7, 12 through 15 or 16, I do believe, or 15, yeah. There was a funeral. It's a funeral procession was coming out of the as he approached. This right here. A funeral procession was coming out as he approached the village gates, and the young man who had died was the widow's only son. The large crowd from the village was with her. When the Lord saw her, his heart overflowed with compassion. "Do not cry," he said. Then he walked over to the coffin and touched it, and he said, and the bearers stopped. "The young man," he said, "I tell you, get up." And then the dead boy sat up and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. And that was one thing I told Lottie, was just, I really, after that verse, I really wanted, we were just praying for compassion at that point, because we didn't know which way it was going to go, to be honest. So we just, either the Lord was going to take him home or he was going to stay here. So, and he showed compassion. So, and another thing that it really hung very heavily over me. I was like, we don't deserve this. We didn't deserve the first gift that he gave us, was our salvation. And, a lot of people walk around with just a ton of shame just because of their past and whatever millstone that they've hung over their around their neck of shame. They don't ever seem to get past that or anything they've ever done. And I promise you, I don't deserve this, and none of us deserve this. And so don't ever think that the Lord's not with you in times, even with what you might have done in your past. So that's one thing that I want to speak on. So, Lottie, do you want to finish up anything?
We just pray that this story will encourage you to see God's faithfulness and His just His presence with us, no matter what the circumstances are, and no matter how dark it is. That it's never dark to Him, and He's got you.
Yeah. Thank y'all. You want to start off with a quick story?
Yeah. So we'd been kind of going through and dealing with some things, and we were getting some counseling and mentorship, and so we were meeting at a couple's house for that. This was in the last few weeks of pregnancy, and one of the things that happened while we were there, they asked us if they could pray for us before we left, and so we were kind of just huddled up praying, and Rick, the guy that was the man mentor, he kind of got choked up, and he just said, I just feel like the Lord is saying that this baby's going to bring the joy of heaven to a lot of people.
Which we did not know what that meant at that time.
Of course.
You're like, well, maybe when he's older. Like
Yeah, you just sort of like,
yeah.
wow, that's cool. I don't know how to take that. And that's, amazing that he shared that, but we didn't know
It
what
was
it
just
meant.
good words of encouragement.
Yeah.
So.
And so one of the other things kind of going on at that time, we were just, I think, feeling discouraged and everything with different things that we were working through. And the Lord was already working ahead of us, going before us. And one of the things he was really laying on my heart was just that theme that I am with you. I'm with you. That just kept coming up. And it was like in the weeks leading up before he was born. So
Yeah, and there was an analogy or an allegory,
an allegory.
that we'll.
So I picked up this book because of being discouraged, and I was just looking for answers somewhere. It's kind of one of those like, Lord, show me what to read, and he led me to this book. And there's a chapter called Discouragement, and I read this allegory at the beginning of the chapter, and then later we just. I don't know, the Lord used it.
Yeah, it really helped me through. There was one day that I just become extremely discouraged through the whole process of Tucker being in the hospital. I do believe it was like day number 4, but we just had got a lot of bad news that day. So this is one of the things that I really leaned on and just did not let the devil take his hold on that day. So I don't know, it's hard to just talk, or it's hard to tell the story on the allegory, but it's maybe
You
we'll
want me to
read
just
it.
kind of
Yeah.
summarize it? She says, in fact, just as courage is faith in good, so discouragement is faith in evil. And while courage opens the door to good, discouragement opens it to evil. And this was an allegory that she tells. The allegory declared that once upon a time, Satan, who desired to entrap a devoted Christian worker, allied a council of his helpers to decide on the best way of doing it and to ask for volunteers. After the case had been explained, an imp offered himself to do the work. How will you do it? Asked Satan. Oh, replied the imp, I will paint to him the delights and pleasures of a life of sin in such glowing colors that he will be eager to enter upon it. That will not do, said Satan, shaking his head. The man has tried sin, and he knows better. He knows it leads to misery and ruin, and he will not listen to you. Then another imp offered himself, and again Satan asked, what will you do to win the man over? I will picture to him the trials and the self-denials of a righteous life, and will make him eager to escape from them. Oh, that will not do either, said Satan, for he has tried righteousness, and he knows that its paths are paths of peace and happiness. Then a third imp started up and declared that he was sure he could bring the man over. Why, what will you do, asked Satan, that you're so sure? I will discourage his soul, replied the imp triumphantly. That will do, exclaimed Satan. You will be successful. Go and bring back your victim. So the whole chapter just talks about how discouragement can't be from the Lord, and to have courage in the face of trials, and that they're for building up our character and for us to build up our trust in God. And so it's just another piece of that puzzle where it was like the Lord was just so many steps ahead of us that we didn't even know it was coming, but he was already preparing our hearts to walk through what, he knew was coming.
It's even kind of part of Tucker's deal, like it was finding out weeks or months later about pieces of the story, like, from the paramedic to the people that were working on him and what they were thinking at the time and why they were doing certain things. The Lord was working the whole time, and we just did not know the details of which he's into the details, which
He's in so many
yeah,
details.
we just did not know it, and that's what's
But
crazy about it.
He allowed us to see it as time went on.
Yeah.
We were like, oh, this is it, And then the kids were getting ready for school, and I was in labor, and they saw me, and they're like, oh, we're gonna have a baby when we get home. This is gonna be so exciting.
Yeah, I got all the kids off to everybody. We had
somebody come pick them
designated-
up and give them a ride to school.
give them a ride to school, and so everything was
It was
as
like
of right now, and then everything-
normal. Because
everything was
we
normal.
should preface, we have home births,
births,
so
yeah.
we were at home,
Yeah.
and so it was like, yeah, we'll have a baby brother or sister. We didn't know what it was going to be when you get home from school.
And
So they left, and then
so kind of to, I guess, started off like, so Tucker was born, meconium aspiration, which basically he had pooped in his sac. But due to the fact that her water did not break, did not let us know that we had any issues until the moment of birth.
The moment he was born,
Yeah.
that was when I was like, I just remember like, kind of picking up, and sometimes they take a minute to kind of get their breath. So there wasn't like a panic initially. It was like, oh, he's starting a little bit. We're trying to get him going, And then it was like within a minute or two, the midwife's like, hey, go ahead and call 911.
It was,
We need
yeah,
to get some help.
he got, I vividly remember he tried to cry twice, and that was...
It was just, you could tell he was struggling. And so Sylvia's my midwife, so we were working on him, we're trying to listen, and I didn't have a sense of panic. It was still like, we just need to get him going. I didn't really know how bad it was. She's like, I need you to listen and let me know, are you hearing breath sounds? So I'm auscultating him, and she's trying to bag him, and we're trying to see if there's air. And I said, it just sounds like squish, 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 And so really quickly, the firefighters got there and the EMS.
Yeah,
and
so he was
everything.
born at 9:43. I believe that we were, by the point that they got him intubated and had him on the, we were already through the emergency room and in a ICU room by 10:30. So literally less than 45 minutes. Everything was rocking and rolling. So within the first 10 minutes, a baby has to hit so many milestones of oxygen within the blood. So the oxygen within their blood needs to be in the upper 80s within the first 10 minutes, and which that'll be part of his story. His blood, his oxygen levels was in the 18s.
They were in the teens.
Yeah,
and 20s.
he got into 18. 18 was the lowest I remember it being, and it was like that we're talking 12 hours. So
they intubated him at the house, took him on the ambulance to the hospital. Ty went with them. I had to stay with Sylvia and kind of get cleaned up, and then she took me up there, and they kind of rushed me back there, and he was kind of lifeless, like not moving at all. They had a ton of machines in the room.
very blue,
Very
blue, and I don't know what they call that. It's kind of skeleton of like where you kind of got, they look like veins running through them, like
like very mottled.
very mottled. Like it was very blue and very mottled.
And that I knew from at least the nursing, but I didn't have a pediatric background, but I was a nurse. I could look at the monitors, and I'm like, his sats are in the like 30s at this point, which is, I'm like, how is he even alive at all? At this point.
So
About, I don't know, within an hour or something, of us being at the hospital, Frames of Love came in, and they take pictures of families and babies that are, that aren't going to make it. And so it's just a free volunteer service that they do. So I didn't really know what that was when they came in, but when they started taking pictures, I realized that these are funeral pictures. And that's when it really hit me for the first time. So, they were taking pictures with him having, holding a little cross in his hand, or, us holding his hand with those, dills and the little teddy bear and things like that. So I feel like that was a turning point where I realized, like, he's not just struggling to breathe a little bit. Like, this is, we may be planning a funeral. And so that was really...
Yeah. It just...
So I think it was after Frames of Love came, and some of our family had been able to get there and kind of come in there. But then the doctor... That's when he's like, okay, I need to sit down and talk with you guys. And he...
Yeah, we just need to have a pretty serious conversation. And
yeah. And so, and he, it felt a little bit, what's the word? He was just very matter of fact. And it was like, he grabbed a piece of paper and a pen, and he started, this is what he just scrawled this out, and he's like...
This is actually the paper that he gave us.
Yeah,
we kept it. Because I'm like, I was convinced that
he said,
we were going to need this someday for a story.
Yeah.
At that point.
Your baby has, these are his 3 diagnoses. because of the meconium aspiration, he said it's like you took Drano and poured it into his lungs. And because his body can't blow off the CO2, that's also causing this acidosis that's in his blood. So basically, it's not just the lungs are full of poison, but the blood is going through to all the organs, and he said a body just can't stay acidotic that long. And so he said, here's your two options. You can do a DNR or withdrawal of care. And so, that's right there. I mean, this kid's death sentence was written on that piece of paper. It was like, there's no hope. I mean, he just gave us no hope whatsoever. So the nurse, our nurse Amber, he said, of course we're gonna do everything we can do, but the outcome is not good,
So at this point, we still had the opportunity to do a
They had him
high-frequency ventilator.
They had him on a regular ventilator, and the nurse said, we're going to switch him, to the high-frequency ventilator.
And then this is where Amber, our nurse, which I kind of call her angel among us, because at this point she was already attached. She's got a heart the size of gold. And she was already attached, and she knew there was going to be an opportunity where Lottie could hold Tucker between the transition of going from a conventional ventilator to a high frequency ventilator, and we didn't know this until after the fact, but they were fighting her on this. They're like, no, you don't need to let the mom hold the baby. That's a bad idea. We don't need to do that. That's
he's already under so much stress. We just need to not be touching him.
This could be a scenario where this could maybe send him off further on, But Amber eventually finally told us, she's like, I've waited too long before to let moms hold their babies.
Yeah. She said, I've just waited too long, too many times until it was too late. And she's like, I just made up my mind. I didn't care if I was going to lose my job. I was going to let you hold your baby. So they did. So they started getting him ready. Of course, there's cords everywhere, and it was really crazy. And I'm like, can I touch him here? Can
it took three or four nurses to be able to get.
Yeah, so I put him in my arms, and at this point, his vitals were his O2 sats, which should be 90 or above, were in the 20s. And I'm looking at that monitor going like, oh my gosh, I'm fixing to say goodbye. Well, he kind of his skin starts pinking up a little bit. His vitals start getting better. He
actually is grabbing, he has a ET tube in him, so he's grabbing for the ET tube.
Starts grabbing at his tubes in his mouth. And, we've never experienced this before, so we're like, we don't know what's going on exactly, but all these nurses, the doctors, they start coming back in the room, and they're all looking at him, and they're looking at each other, but they're not saying anything, but they're clearly communicating something, and we're just bawling, we don't know exactly. And the doctor, he's looking over, and he said those two options we just talked about,
they're off the table.
Yeah, he goes, this is what we consider a massive improvement. Those two options are off the table. We're just going to see what happens. And
we actually have pictures of that, so we'll make sure everybody gets because these guys are just standing there and what? And then I'm there. Our nurse practitioner, she was pretty straightforward. I wouldn't say she was heartless, but she's like, I just don't know that, I don't think this will get better. She was very just things are very matter of fact.
They don't want to give you, and they kept saying, we don't want to give you any false hope.
Yeah. So it was, but she was even looked like, what? Just the look on her face was kind of looking back.
What is going on here? So I don't know. That was day one.
And all that stuff.
Oh yeah, so the day he was admitted to the hospital was the day of the wildfires, that were so crazy all around here. And we're sitting in the hospital room going like, my baby can't breathe and this room smells like smoke. So that was kind of wild. And then the next day, they kind of all came in the room and they said, we're going to try to get him transferred to Dallas so that he can get on ECMO, which is a heart-lung bypass machine. And they were all excited. So we kind of started getting things moving, thinking we may be needing to pack up and go to Dallas and get kids situated. And he called, he actually called Lubbock, and he called Houston and Fort Worth.
And all of them rejected.
They all rejected him and
And-
said he was too sick and it was too risky to transfer him. So we were, that was
Kind of a hard blow.
a real blow. And then they had been doing some echoes, and we knew the left side of his heart was failing. So things were just it was just a very fragile situation. But his vital signs were, somewhat stable, but not great. And he was still acidotic. So then the next day,
Which would be, so Tuesday is when he was born. Wednesday, get a lot of disappointing news on just getting, rejected from 3 hospitals. And then day 3, Lottie had a family friend that it kind of got us in connection with Med City, Dallas. And
she had she's a nurse practitioner in Dallas, and she'd worked there. So she knew all the people in the NICU and the cardiac intensive care unit, and she was talking to all them. She had all of them. She told them his story, and we had their names, and we spent the whole day trying to get all that information from her and get it really organized so that we could ask the doctor, will you call one more hospital to get him transferred where he can get on ECMO.
To add on top of that, it was snowing that day too. So first day can't fly out because it's smoky. Even though they rejected him, they wasn't going to fly anyways. And then day 3, it's
Snowstorm.
It's snowstorm.
It's just like
it was just
So we waited all day long. Finally, it was late in the afternoon. The doctor
it was like 4
finally
o'clock
came
in the afternoon, yeah.
And we just said, had our paper and all our notes ready. And we were like, can you just call these people? Here's their names. We just call one more hospital and try to get them transferred. And he's like, look, I'll do it. He goes, I'll even put it on speaker for you so that you can hear the conversation. So he puts it on speaker, and we get to hear the whole conversation. We've spent all day long and been up since, all night and everything. Just exhausted, and we get to hear the conversation. So he gives them report, and they said, we're sorry, this is your situation, we can't take him. So that was the point where it was because we were like, oh man, God gave us this connection, this is going to work out, we're going to get this ECMO, and this is going to be all better, So you see all these pieces moving, and you think, oh, the Lord's going to act in this way. And then it was the total opposite of what we expected. The answer is still a no. And it was like a punch in the gut, and then all of a sudden just peace.
But we knew a no. We even told because we say we talked the doctor into this. We basically begged him. We're like, just give us one more.
Yeah.
I remember crying pretty hard. I was just like, one more chance, please.
Yeah. And he did. And
he did. And then we
when
knew
the answer was no, it was like, okay, this is where we're supposed to be. We've literally done
all the crying was turned off, and we
possibly do.
We just said, all right, we're moving into Northwest Hospital. We're here.
This is where God wants us. And the peace came because, at least I think you would say the same thing, but in my heart, it was like God is so present when you need him in those moments. And I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that God is good, and that that it was his story from the very beginning. And I was like, I don't know what your plan is, I don't know what your purpose is, but I know it's good. I know if you heal him, it's going to be because you're good, and I know if you take him home, it's because you're good, and that whatever decision you make, I'm okay with it. And we've done everything we can do, and God, it's in your hands. And it was like really that moment of letting go and knowing he's yours. And you've given him to us, and we're giving him back to you, and our hands are like this. That was when we just had that peace that passes understanding.
that point, I had spent every night at
He
the
was
hospital.
spending every night at the hospital and having
Going home for
me
a couple
go home
hours.
so that I could see the kids.
Yeah.
So I would try to have, at least tuck them into bed, or maybe, I don't think most of the time that week, I don't think I got to eat supper with them. My family basically showed up and moved in and just took over. So they were taking care of kids and getting them to school and that kind of stuff. And then I was trying to see him in the evening. So it's just back and forth to the hospital.
And
And he
I'd
just
come
moved
home.
into the hospital and stayed around the clock.
I would come home and take a shower, be here for a couple hours, and go back. So
Yeah.
that was kind of. So
Yeah.
I think I stayed 10 straight days. I do believe in the hospital. So.
Yeah. And at this point, that was the other thing where it was like, we were so tied up there, but the Lord was so good to take care of the kids here and to show us what we needed. Because it's just, you're just on so little sleep and it's just crazy.
Well, that's where everybody, I mean, from when you say the church, I mean, not just talking about WAC, but just everybody that we had from older churches to family to friend. Like
Yeah.
even Lottie had a small mom's prayer group. Everybody just,
Yeah.
the
Body of Christ just.
showed up. Like, I mean, our kids were, I mean, emotionally, I mean, and just the mother and mom and dad being around the touch, they didn't get that, but they were getting a lot of love from other people.
There was, it was still so touch and go, and we didn't know if they would ever get to meet him. We didn't know if he's going to pass away, and you're trying to protect them. But my oldest daughter, she was like, I kind of pulled her aside. I'm like, hey, are you okay? And she's like, I just feel like y'all aren't being completely honest about Tucker. And I said, well, you're right, And so I got to have a really real conversation with her by herself. And the Lord just gave me exactly what I needed. And we had this deep spiritual conversation about how do we trust God in this, and how do we control our thoughts when our thoughts are like, hey, is my life ever going to be normal again? Are mom and dad ever going to come home? Is Tucker going to die? Okay, so where are those thoughts coming from, And let's focus on what's true. And I said, the truth is we don't know, and God is good, and you've got a new bike out there, and you need to go ride your new bike and go play with your friends,
Yeah.
And we're only supposed to focus on today. And if your thoughts start going to, those kind of things, this is what they're going to sound like. You need to stop yourself and say, wait a minute, that's worrying about tomorrow. And Jesus said, just worry about today, because that's the enemy's territory, is the future. And right now, what's true? I'm safe. I'm loved. I've got people here taking care of me. Tucker's got tons of people around him in the hospital taking care of him. And God's in control, So we just, out of this situation, we just got to have these conversations with the kids, at their different levels, And I just see God's goodness in that too, that it was like, you always want to shield and protect your kids from pain, but God was using the pain and the trial to build that character like he promises, That was just another way that he provided. So.
And then day 4 rolls around, and which
That was
we had already mentioned that, part of his heart was already, compromised or failing in parts. And then they did another
the left side of his heart was failing.
And they
Friday we got the news the right side of his heart is now also failing. And so that was that night that you were up there all night. I think this was after we signed the DNR. Yeah.
Yeah, this after we signed the DNR, and that night was I don't know, that was a heavy day because we'd already have a heavy day on Thursday, and then Friday was just we got the news that his heart was given out, and we're like, all right, well,
So,
I remember being at the hospital and late. I woke up at 4:00 in the morning, and I was just like this overbearing of like just darkness type deal, and that kind of. It goes back to that allegory where, just discouragement. And I was just tired.
yeah.
To say the least, just wore out. But that was where our little group me deal that we had done, where everybody was just posting all these prayers and all the songs. And I'll give a little shout out to to the Hickmonts because they had sent over this little lullaby by Christy Nockels, and there was a song on there, Armor of God, and there was actually a gentleman that I knew before that had Alan Fletcher had gave me this little coin. It was just a coin that you could carry with you that had all the different armors of God on it, and I'd had that coin on Tucker's bed the whole time that he had been in the hospital. And then I found that song, and it was, I mean,
The Armor of God.
I was just crying like a baby in this hospital room all by myself. And I told Lottie I turned that hospital into like the Saturday morning worship, because by this point, we were already in, it was already into Saturday, and I just...
You just started worshiping through all the discouragement. You just started playing the songs.
all the different
worshiping.
songs, all the different songs that people had posted, and that's where just that, at that point, where all those different things that people had posted and different songs had really brought a lot of encouragement to me. And then I call Lottie, and I'm like, I think I call her at 5, and I'm like, hey, it's like,
Early in the
what are you doing? And she's like, well, what's up? And she's like, and
So
I guess I
was
got
up-
to tell her side of the
so
story.
I had to get up at 4 and pump, and the Lord told me to pray for you. And so I was praying for you, and then I said, well, okay, now what? He said, read through James. So I, you have the audio Bible. So I listened through James while I was up, and I was like, and so I was all jazzed up because I was like, I listened through James, and it's so amazing because it's like, James is like straightforward instructions. You know what which is what I needed. It was like, do this, this is how you should live, blah, blah. And I'm like, then you get to this part in chapter 5, and it's like, here's the instructions on what you do if someone is sick, and I think we should do this. What do you think? And it talks about if somebody is sick, have the elders come and anoint them with oil and lay hands on them and pray for them. And it was like, it was still my heart was still like, he is yours. I don't know what the answer is going to be, but I'm following your instructions. This is just our next step of obedience. And so, what do you think? And he was like, yeah, let's call him and get him here. And so that's what we did. And I want to back up a little bit, because one of the ways the Lord really was so clear to us through the whole thing was like he was giving us themes as we went along with what we needed. And the first theme was ask, seek, knock. Keep on knocking. In Luke 11, it talks about, the friend comes to your door, and he was knocking on his friend's door in the middle of the night, and he's like, my kid's already in bed, I've already locked the doors, I'm not going to get up. But because of your persistence, he's going to get out of bed and give you whatever you need. And that was that first thing, was like, just keep asking. And so so that's what we did, and that was with the whole Mason thing. And we're gonna ask one more time, and I'd wake up in the middle of the night just distraught, and I just, you don't have words. And I had this thing with the Lord, I would just start like knocking my hand, like, Lord, I'm knocking again.
So there was another verse that had came across on me was, I think it's Luke 7, but it talks about where the lady was outside of the town, and she was weeping because her son had passed away, and Jesus came up to her and said, do not weep anymore, and then he does a miracle there and brings her son back to life. And the whole thing that I took away from that is like at the end of that verse, it talks about, he showed compassion. And I just kept telling Lottie, I said, let's hope that God gives us compassion.
That's the God we...
Because we were at this point, we're like,
God was
because
a
that was
compassionate
the
God.
only thing that was going to get us through this, was he was going to have to
He's
do something.
compassionate, and he's the kind of God that understands and suffers with us. That was, Psalm 22 talks about how he suffered with us, and he just gave us all these things as we needed them. And that was the first theme. Then the second theme was the armor of God theme, and then it kept coming up, and then he kept confirming it, because on our group meeting, people were encouraging us and sharing songs and scriptures.
Because all of those were matching
They were
up.
like
Yeah.
the exact, I'm talking about the exact verses people would put, the people that we hadn't talked to or told or shared any of this with, they would post that exact verse. Luke 11, then James 5, and then, it was just like, oh my gosh, this is just amazing confirmation. And he just was so clear to us in the ways that we needed.
guess I'll start back off is like, so that Saturday morning, which had been day 5, and that's whenever we called Shane, and I told him, I said, verse this, and I read it off, and I said, I'm not asking for y'all to do something special or try to perform a miracle. I said, we're just being obedient to Scripture. And Shane's like, yeah, we can do that. And he said, I understand. And he's like, let me call some guys. It's like, I know it being Saturday. Was it Saturday?
Saturday, yeah.
He's like, I don't know who we can get, but I'll get it. And then, so
they were kind of getting things together on their end.
So at 2, so it was at 2:00, we kind of had that whole time where everybody just took a moment from. I just remember leaving the Trail Life group, and everybody that was on the group meet all at 2:00 just stopped and took a prayer at 2 p.m.
And he had been, like we said, in the hospital every night and was just exhausted. That was the day it was like, I got to step away from this place for a minute. And I, was there during the day. So he was getting to have some time with the kids.
Yeah, I came.
During that
actually,
time.
At that point, I
It's
actually.
like God just moved everything exactly where it needed to be.
I took the kids to the park, and I just had kid time.
Yeah.
So
we were at the hospital. My dad came with me. My sister, I think she had just recently studied about like the oil. Because I was like, what kind of oil? Like, I don't know. We're just trying to do this the way it says, So she made us the oil. And I said, Dad, you come with me to the hospital today, because if the elders can't make it, I'm pretty sure you could stand in as an elder, and like that would work, or what, And so
We'll make
it's a
this
special
fly.
connection with my dad too. And my dad started to explain to me what the oil meant and all the symbolism of that it really is a symbol of Jesus. And so just even having a deeper understanding of that and having that time of connection, and then the elders showed up and Ken just led it and did an incredible job. More confirmation. It was like more of the scriptures that the Lord had been giving me were the ones that he brought and talked with us through, and we prayed, and it was such, I don't even know if you can describe that. It was such a beautiful coming together, and I just was able to step back under the authority of the Scripture and the elders and go like, okay, like we're just gonna let them do their thing and watch it. And it was just a beautiful experience. And they were so humble and so heartfelt in how they ministered to us and came around that room, and my dad said it hasn't escaped me that we have 7, God has ordained that there's 7 men here around this little tiny baby, and 7 is the biblical number of like completion and wholeness. And there were 7 men in that room praying for him. And so, it was just a beautiful thing. And then about an hour or two later.
Actually, it was exactly 2 hours later.
It's exactly 2 hours later.
They did another
echocardiogram.
Yeah, and at that point, it was
Came in and
what was the word? We didn't know exactly what that word.
They said, well, this came back. It says significant. She showed me on the computer. It says significantly improved. And I'm like, well, both sides of his hearts were failing. What does significantly improved mean? Are we still like in some gray area territory, rocky territory? And they were like, no, it's almost, his heart function is almost normal. Like, we won't need to do another echocardiogram unless there's some kind of clinical indication. And so we're still trying to pray, and all these nurses just come in and they just like bear hug me, and I'm like, I think this is really good, and
her dad said they all look like a bunch of giddy schoolgirls.
And of course the midwife's there because it was hard on her too, so she was there every day checking in, and the respiratory therapist, she comes in and they're having to do the blood gases to check the pH, and so she gets another blood gas reading, and they've still been below normal. He's still acidotic. They get it, and I have a picture of it. They're all leaning in over the blood gas.
Yeah.
Came back normal after that prayer that afternoon. So his heart was functioning normally. He's finally not acidotic, and they said we still need to not have too much hope. Like, his brain is still taking a hit. Like, we don't know what his brain function is going to be, but keep praying. Don't stop praying. Keep doing what you're doing.
Kind of just to recap on, I mean, you got to think about this. This kid for 5 days basically had
I've been acidotic.
it was
in, like,
yeah. I mean, just he had acid in his veins
lungs were not.
that should have been eating away at parts of his organs, and this is what one thing I was hanging my hat on the whole time. His kidneys never, or his liver enzymes. I take that back.
No, his kidneys.
His kidney enzymes never failed, which should have been one of the first things that should have went as his body was starting to tear itself
he was
up.
So they had a catheter in
Yeah,
him. And
so
we're like, he's still producing urine. His
the
kidneys
kid
are clearly working.
He was peeing a bunch.
So is that
and
a
his-
good sign? And they're like, well,
Yeah, we
that
think
does
so.
seem kind of strange,
Thanks,
you know?
yeah. I'd ask
They're
them, I
like-
said, well, shouldn't that already have failed? And they're like, well, yeah, but I mean, there was a lot of things that they just couldn't. And I don't know, that was
the
one
nurse
piece of
practitioner
hope.
said from the time he came in, she goes, I just couldn't figure it out because biochemically, none of this makes any sense. His blood pressure should have been in the dump, and he never lost a blood pressure. He never lost a heart rate. And none of that made any sense, you know, and we just can't, science can't explain
And this is the
everything.
same nurse practitioner that was there the first day that was very, very cut and dry. Like she didn't buttercoat
was
any of
not-
it.
yeah.
Yeah, and she's just like, yeah, it doesn't, this chemistry-wise, like, nothing makes sense. Like, and so,
Yeah.
I liked
So that was a good day.
yeah, it was good.
That's a really good
It was
day.
a really, really good day. But they still, even after all that was said and done, the doctors were very adamant about like, all right, you know, like this is all
We're
good.
not out of the woods
We're
yet.
not
They
good
said-
because he's like, there's
They said he's still on the highest ventilator we have. There's only 2 in the whole hospital, and we've never had a kid on this ventilator at these settings. He's the worst case we've ever seen. So, you know, we're not out of the woods, and we just have to wait and see. So that was a little easier to take after everything that had happened. We're like, okay, you know, we'll just wait and see at this point. So that was sort of the next couple of weeks was sort of a long stretch of, it's just very slow. You're just kind of trying to wean the ventilator, and you're just long, slow days at that point. Watching lab work, watching vital signs, you know.
It was, yeah, because we stared there, we just would sit there and stare at the monitor. I mean, it was for 10 or 12 hours, you know, and then try to take
Yeah.
a break. But the crazy thing about it was always, it was like 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. It was just
very
because they would try to do something to his medicines or whatever is IVs or even his drawing a blank, the ventilator, and they would make a change and his body would respond funky to it and his blood samples would go bad, and we're like, all right, well, you know, that's not good. And then his body would always, you give it a day and then bam, he was like, and then he would like have 2 good days and then he would have a bad day. So
Yeah,
it was
just a long process.
a long process. That whole scenario, like you don't know how you're gonna handle something like this until you're in the middle of it, because you're just like you know stories of people that have went through things that are really challenging, and you're like, man, how do you cope with that? And the cope was always, I don't know, I guess, I mean, the Lord gives you things when you don't know what else to do. You know, He just gives you pieces, and
Somebody said, God gives you dying grace on a dying day.
yeah.
So the Lord gives you your daily bread. So you look at those situations, you think, I don't know how I could ever go through that. But He doesn't give you what you need to go through that until you need it. He gives you what you need that day. But that doesn't mean that, I mean, we, you know, are human. And I think our faith was stronger when it was harder and it was more severe. It was like, I think that our faith was stronger in those moments. And then when we hit those days in the wilderness where it's just, you just don't know which direction you're going and you're tired. And the good thing was that we both hit days where we felt weak in our faith and we struggled and we cried and we were discouraged and we gave in to that, but it was never on the same day.
Yeah.
So he would have a weekday and I'd be strong, and then I'd have a weekday and he'd be strong, and the Lord would always help us to balance each other out.
This will be a little confession on my part, because right after his heart had got better. This is kind of the funny part about it. I mean, literally, I don't think it was within a couple hours. I was worrying about his brain. And I'm like, you always read your Old Testament and go, man, Israelites, man, they are some slow people. And I found myself, and I remember praying that night because me and Lottie we actually got on the hospital floor. I don't know how sanitary that was, but we did it. We got on the floor on our knees and we were just praying and thanking him. And I remember just saying, I'm sorry, God, for being so forgetful.
Within hours. You realize, wow, we humans really are sheep.
Yeah,
thankfully he understands that and he's patient with us.
We had a good chuckle in the middle of our prayer at that night, but I really understood the Israelites at that point, because I'm like, holy smokes, like that really just happened. And I mean, because we were, like Lottie's right, I think we were stronger in our moments of harder times versus the times that you put your guard down and the devil, I felt like there was a spiritual battle the whole time we were in there, on everything.
Day 20 of life. Day 18, they put him from the jet ventilator to the regular ventilator. Then 2 days later, he was 20 days old. They extubated him and put him on the nasal cannula. And once he was on the nasal cannula, that's when he could go I think they waited about a week. And March 25th, that's when they did the MRI, which was the big question mark, because it was like, we still don't know about the brain because we can't do an MRI until he's off the vent. So they took him for the MRI, and they told us, y'all can't go with him, go eat lunch, and probably have results tomorrow. So we weren't in any rush or anything, and go have lunch. We come back, and about an hour later, the doctor comes in, and several nurses, and they've got that look on their face again. And we're like, what's going on? Because when they all come in, it's like, okay, something big's happening. We don't know if it's good or bad. And the doctor says... And this is the same doctor that gave us this piece of paper. And he said, well, I think we have another legend. And he goes, I'm not kidding you.
Yeah.
And he said, the MRI is completely normal. It shows no damage. I've talked to doctors here in Amarillo, talked to doctors, neurologists at Cook's in Dallas. And he goes, from a physician's perspective, this is the exact opposite of what we would have expected. And that's a good thing. And he just kind of stands there grinning, and we're like, are you serious? And he's like, we can't explain this. Like, there's just no explanation. And he goes, I do a symposium once a year. And he goes, I ask families to come and kind of share their stories. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. And he goes, I want you to mark down September 27th on your calendar, and I'm not asking you, I'm telling you to be there. Can you do that? And we're like, oh yeah, we'll be there. I said September 27th.
That's 7 months to the day that he was born. So
7 months to the day. He'll
that's
be
another,
7 months old to the day.
We talk about these themes, and that seems to be...
The Lord kept saying, 7, he's going to be complete. And another pastor that we know, he had told us, he said, the Lord just keeps saying to me every day in every way, he's getting better and better, and he's going to be 100%. And so you take that at the time, you go like, well, okay, I hope, but that was exactly, it was like, I think we asked, and he just healed him head to toe, just exactly like we asked. And he doesn't always do that. That's not always the answer, but he did answer our prayers,
Well, I want to kind of go back real quick. On the paramedic, we got to, and we'll talk about this, there's a lot of things that we see that happened early on that we didn't even know, and like
we weren't aware of.
These little things that I think like God's into the details. And so this guy was by the name of Zach Molden. He was the EMS guy that got Tucker intubated. And we just thought this whole time, like when he come in, the the fire department had showed up, but none of them had the right ET tubes, so they were they weren't freaking out, but they were getting a little nervous, and we were doing heart, breath compressions and stuff like that, keeping him.
They weren't chest compressions. They were just giving breaths. He never lost a heart rate.
Yeah, this kid never lost a heart rate. But this guy walks in and just chill. Like, I mean, I'm like, man, this guy's like, he don't seem to be like, there's a baby here. I'm just kind of like, and I AK named him Stud because he kind of just walked into a war zone acting like, like no problem. And he got down and he got him intubated on his second try. And the whole time I'm sitting there looking at him, and I'm like, I kind of already lost my composure. I'm just kind of breathing heavy, kind of, sad, or just bad crying scenarios. And he got him intubated, but come to find out, he did not have the right stylet, which is that's the thing that curves the ET tube to go down their throat. He said he rolled it up like a Fruit Loop.
And hoped it would work. Because I sent my partner out to my truck. He's tearing apart the truck, trying to find this stylet. And he goes, I finally just decided I can't wait on him any longer. He goes, I rolled it like a Fruit Loop, kind of squished it, and
stuck it down him.
Stuck it down him, and got it in. But then on the ambulance on the way to the hospital, and we didn't know any of this. He told us all of this after we were home. We got in touch with him, and we said, tell us about that day. What was your perspective? And that's when he filled us in on all this. I said, you're telling me you improvised? And he's like, yeah.
I said, and I asked him, I said, how did you keep her cool through all that? And he said, this is the way I look at it. He said, not my kid, not my problem. And I said, that's crazy. It's like, but I'm
but
like,
we're glad
but
it
I'm
was
like,
you
I'm glad, and we had met another paramedic that had knew him, and that I was talking to him, and he said, man, there's no other person that you wanted to work on your baby that day. He said he's the right amount of cockiness to be able to get something done like that. And I'm like, it's just a very interesting conversation with him, because he was just like, man, he's like, I made the mom get up and kiss her baby. He's like, she just had a baby. And he's like, I made her get up. And he's like, I wasn't even thinking. I'm like, just little details like that. I mean, you could kind of chuckle about it, but at the time it was like, we didn't even realize the things that he was overcoming that it should have been.
And then he said,
talented.
yeah, on the ambulance ride on the way back, the vitals and everything were showing like, okay, he still had a heart rate and blood pressure, but his oxygen was so low that it wouldn't pick up on the monitor, because the monitor won't go below 50.
Yeah.
And so he said, normally you want to start troubleshooting and figure out, like, that probably means the ET tube placement is off and you might want to mess with it or something like that. And he goes, but my gut just said, just leave it alone and don't mess with it. Because if you mess with it and you get him extubated, he didn't know if he could get him reintubated because he had to improvise and he still didn't have his stylet. So that ET tube, he was right in following his gut, because it was the same ET tube he had the entire time until he was extubated. He had gotten it in there and it was working. It was just that his O2 was that low.
So when he got to the hospital with him in the emergency room, the oxygen level read 38. So we all know that within the first 10 minutes of life, a baby's oxygen levels need to be in the higher 80s, and he was in the 38s at that point. And so he said he didn't even write 38. He said, I wrote below 50 because that's the way my machine reads. And
and he's like, I just couldn't bring myself
he couldn't bring himself to write the 38. So with that being said, that's just another glimpse of like how God was already taking care of little details that we didn't even, because I'm not gonna lie, if I'd have known those details, I don't think, you just don't need to know some things at certain points in your life. So, this is another thing that was kind of crazy about it.
I don't know if we told that part very well. So, like, one of the very first therapies they did was to cool his body temperature to lower the normal temperature to reduce the damage and the impact of the acidity and the low oxygen on his
basically
vital organs.
To conserve body organs.
Slows their body down to the point that it can maybe reduce that impact. So they already had all that stuff wrapped around him, and she said he's going to feel cold, and we didn't find out until after, the day of discharge, I think we found out that they actually had to warm him up to be to the right cooling temperature which is just like nobody can explain
So
that.
it was
Like
al-
his body was already so cold that they had to warm him up to be cooled.
So I always said that it's like God put a little ice cube in him, because like the whole purpose of cooling him was, the brain will be the last thing to go. Everything, because that's what the brain has to keep blood. The heart will be second, and then it goes down to kidneys, liver, and kidneys and lungs. So, kidneys will be the first one that'll fall off the chart, and then lungs, and then heart, and then brain. I do believe that's kind of the order of things.
Yeah.
So that's the reason the purpose of cooling him is
You're trying to
maybe
preserve those
to
organs.
minimize damage to those organs. And
Yeah. So anyway, I've always struggled with fear of man and like worrying about what people think. And again, I'm like, I hope I can hang on to this lesson, because during that time, things being what they were, I just didn't care, and I just sing worship songs. I didn't care if the nurses came in and would be singing to him or praying out loud, or God would give me, like that first day, Lord, what do I do? What do I do? And it just, in your spirit, he just says, read Psalm 139. So I just read Psalm 139 out loud, and for all these things are going on. And like, I wouldn't normally do that. I would normally be like, well, I'll just, pray in my head or something. But it was like that fear man, God just goes, whoosh, none of that matters, And so I think there were so many things that he was just giving us as we needed, and allowing it to be, I think, a testimony to the people that were there. One of the nurses, she told me one day, she goes, I just have to tell you, I haven't even been his nurse, but every time I walk in that room, I just feel God's love in that room. She's like, I can't explain it, but I feel God's love when I go in there. So there were just a lot of little things like that along the way that.
there's even the funny part of it right now is like that song that I had found, that Head to Toe. I used to play it over him every morning.
Yeah.
And still to right now, like whenever he gets upset, we'll turn that song on, and boy, he just settles right down. And
Yeah.
the
does.
nurses, the whole time we were in the hospital, they would, and I mean, I had very little faith in this at that point, but they would say, they know you're here. And I'm like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
But there's some truth to that. It's kind of,
Yeah, he would show signs that he would know.
yeah, he knew.
He knew our voices. Like he had the brain monitor on, and you could watch it. And especially when Ty would talk to him, the waves, would change, and you could tell. And then he'd respond, or he'd kind of turn his head and kind of peek at you, And so that was, I don't know,
This kind of steps back a little earlier in the deal, but there was a lady by the name of Zelma, and she was actually the lady that hooked up the EEG, and she finally came back later on the last stint after he had already been pulled off of the ventilator, and she told us, because they had put it on him, and then they took it off of him. And I'm like, and they told us, well, no, we'll leave this EEG on him for multiple days. And as soon as they put it on, they took it off. Well, come to find out, Zelma had told me, she's like, well, they told me to take it off because there was no reason keeping it on him. He was not going to live, so there was no reason. And so we really got to have a good conversation. And that was one thing. She's like, this is a miracle. Like the echo lady, it was the same thing. She's like, I remember reading his day that his heart got better. She's like, that's a miracle. Like it touched.
Everybody just kept, yeah.
Everybody was touched by this, and it kind of goes back to that whole thing when that Rick had prayed over us that one day when we were there, just getting mentoring from him, and he said this, he would touch people, and he did. I mean, he touched a lot of people. And we got to just hear people speak openly about their faith, right there in the middle of it all, and that was awesome.
Yeah,
on that part.
Zelma, she told us at the end, she goes, after I got him in the emergency room, they told me to take it off. She's like, I just went back to my office and I prayed, Lord, I don't know what your plan is for this little baby's life, but she shared kind of what she had prayed for him that day and everything. And so there were people praying that we didn't even, know. Even the doctor, she said, one of the doctors, she was one of those that she didn't get real personal for most of the time. And then toward the end, she just said, I told all my friends that I know we got to make it rain some prayers, and we've got to make it pour down. And so she had all of these people that we didn't even know she was a believer, and then she told us later that they were making it rain. Prayers for Tucker. So,
you start, I don't know, I felt like that from the time that his heart got better to the time that we got the MRI was just a time that might have been more of my rougher time, because I remember I was trying to go back to work at that point, and I just was like, I was not ready because I just had too many thoughts going on. But now you actually have a moment to reflect and kind of realize how close it was, and all the things that God was doing.
Yeah.
And then I'll be honest, that's kind of where your point of your faith, you're just like, man, and this is my big takeaway from this whole thing is we don't deserve any of this. Just kind of going back to me and Lottie's history, like first part of our marriage, I would call it ugly, very ugly. And so there's just things that I know that I've done in my past. I'm like, I am not a person that should have a child that gets all these blessings, because you just don't deserve it, But so you never know how God's going to treat a scenario and what compassion He's going to show. I think it's the way I treat every scenario in my life now. I'm a little bit easier going, a little bit more thankful on even when the dishes are whenever something gets stacked up and it doesn't seem like it's going well, it's okay, because our life was messy there for a minute, really messy. Mm-hmm. Everybody's life is messy, but at that point, the messy didn't seem to be, it wasn't a big deal because that wasn't the focus, So
I think it was his arm is not too short to save. There's nothing that's too hard for him,
But yeah.
That he, it doesn't matter who you are or what you've done. There's nothing he can't do, and he proved that just within our own redemption story, and then he proved it physically with Tucker's healing. His arm is not too short.
Because that is definitely something. There's a lot of things that through me and Lottie's story, just on our being early married, and just seeing the things how God, we even getting back to Amarillo versus living in New Mexico, moving to Kansas City and coming back here. There's a long story behind that, but we had started coming back here and really we started seeing a lot of how God was working. And it's the same deal with Tucker. Like, we seen all these things after we're able to step back and look at it objectively and go, wow, he was there the whole time.
1,000 steps ahead.
Even when it was dark and ugly and just wasn't, you just didn't know how things were going to turn out.
Yeah. And
your faith might have been at the lowest point. He was working,
There was another kind of theme I wanted to share too, and this is out of order, but God doesn't always tell you don't always get the why. A lot of times we don't get the why. But when we got the rejections on everyone was like, you need to get to Dallas, you need to get to a higher level of care, you need this ECMO, and the answer was no, 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 no. And, I didn't have the why, but the next morning God gave me the why, because it just dropped in my spirit as clear as could be. He said, I'm not going to share my glory with ECMO. And I was like, okay, Lord, makes sense, because if we were to get transferred and get him on ECMO, the story would be, oh, we got him transferred and he got on this ECMO and saved his life, and he didn't need ECMO, God doesn't need ECMO. And my sister, she made the point too. She said, that's just like God, to use the small town hospital, not even the best hospital. She goes, she had gone to BSA initially. She goes, I don't know if you've been to BSA, but it's really nice. And she goes, I walked into Northwest and it's what you might call a little more ghetto, a little rougher. And she goes, I hope they know what they're doing. So she goes, he used this little town hospital on the week of wildfires and snowstorms and no ECMO machine. And just, it's just like, God is going to use all of the B team, you know, to manifest His glory.
But even,
and that's like, man, is that not the God of the Bible? You know, He just uses those regular, everyday, imperfect, messy people, and for some reason, that's who He uses to show His glory.
I mean, even to say, like, all the ladies at Northwest, like, even the doctors, like, I wouldn't have, if I could have handpicked them, I wouldn't have picked them any better than the way they showed up to us. I mean, like, everybody contributed. And I say just, I'm not a medical side of the deal, but just as emotional, and like, they were very vulnerable and very open with us. They were like, it was almost like you had your sister standing there with you, telling you, hey, it's okay, I've been here and I got this I've done this before, it's not a big deal. Like, you know, so.
Yeah, just being really real.
Just really, and they're awesome people.
They're the best.
Don't ever underestimate, you know, what you think God can do and what He can't do, you know. And what little things that like I was saying from the very get-go, the details, you know, just from the smallest thing, from the paramedic, you just never know. I mean, it's just, you know, whenever you come and encounter with somebody that has something going on in their life, you just like, you know, you kind of like, man, that sounds impossible, you know, or just like, I don't think that's going to turn out well for them, you know, and you're like, don't ever think that, because you don't know. I mean, it's even hard to kind of step back and just look at it, because it's just like, man, did that really happen to us? Because it did, but sometimes it's even hard to like settle into the fact, like, wow, that all really happened. But
The way it happened.
yeah, and the way it happened. I mean, the details.
Yeah, He's so in the details. He's so at work in our lives. He's always, I don't know. He's always sees. I think for me, the importance of don't get lukewarm. Don't wait for a crisis to kindle and develop that relationship with the Lord, because He can use crisis to draw you to Himself, but how much better is it to be walking with Him daily, you know, when things are good and then when you go through a crisis and everywhere in between. I think that's what got me through it. It was like, I know who my God is. I can trust Him. It doesn't matter what happens in this situation. I don't like this situation, but I know who He is, and I know that He's got us. So, I don't know. I just think that continuing that, you know, you read. We were just reading in Kings the other day about, you know, sometimes you've got people, they start off strong and they're following the Lord, but then, you know, they get comfortable, they get rich, they get to the point where they, you know, you can kind of get too comfortable and think that you don't need Him, and you start to kind of get lazy in your relationship with Him, I guess is what I'm saying. And I don't know, just the importance of like every day. He's the daily bread. We need Him every day, you know, and to just always be working and growing in your relationship, which there again, we talk about the body of Christ, you know, and doing that within the community. And that was the other takeaway for me too, was just a conviction of how the body of Christ poured out to us and served us in ways that were just tangible, real needs that we had. And I was very convicted about that. Do I love with that kind of pure heart and that kind of generosity? Because I don't know that I have.
Because I mean, like 1 minute the music was playing in our life, and the next minute it wasn't. But it still the kids still needed to make it to school, and
people took
everybody
care of our kids, just took them. It was in the middle of spring break. They would take them and do things with them so that they weren't just, you know, there were just so many practical things, food, like prayer, and just people brought gifts to our kids and just didn't let them be forgotten or lost in the chaos.
If it makes anybody feel better, I gained 20 pounds off of this whole deal, so they did a good job feeding us.
I don't know. I just the giftings that the Lord gives to the body and using your gifts. There was a real conviction for me to like, am I doing that? You know, am I using those gifts, and how can we? Okay, so moving forward, now the conviction is not there to produce guilt, but to spur you on. You know, so in the future, it just is like, wow. Lord, like, where are the opportunities? Like, it's our turn to serve, and we want to do that better than I think we have in the past, you know? So